Welcome to Unlocked, the home of common sense that speaks Britain's language, with me, Martin Daubney. Today's special guest is Richard Tice, Chairman of the Reform Party and former Chairman and MEP for the Brexit Party. Make no mistake, without Richard and party leader Nigel Farage, the UK would surely have sold its soul to the European Union via Theresa May's so-called surrender treaty. Mercifully, that didn't happen. And on January the 31st last year, Mr. Tice secured his place in the history books as one of Britain's most influential Eurosceptics of all time when the UK finally left the EU. That moment marked the end of decades of campaigning. First as a director of the campaign group Business for... You've got to keep scrolling, mate.
We go from the beginning?
Yeah, you have to keep scrolling.
Right.
Sorry, Richard.
And
Right.
5,
Wait.
Go ready when you are. Okay.
Can't get the staff, Rich.
4,
You know that.
3.
Welcome to Unlocked, the home of common sense that speaks Britain's language, with me, Martin Daubney. Today's special guest is Richard Tice, Chairman of the Reform Party and former Chairman and MEP for the Brexit Party. Make no mistake, without Richard and party leader Nigel Farage, the UK would surely have sold its soul to the European Union via Theresa May's so-called surrender treaty. Mercifully, that didn't happen. And on January the 31st last year, Mr. Tice secured his place in the history books as one of Britain's most influential Eurosceptics of all time when the UK finally left the EU. That moment marked the end of decades of campaigning. First as a director of the campaign group Business for Sterling, and later he founded Leave.eu, and Leave means leave. A self-made success story who, unlike most politicians, actually achieved what he set out to achieve. Today, Unlocked asks Richard Tice, what is it about modern Britain that has drawn him back into the brutal business of frontline politics? Mr. Tice, hello again, my friend. It's been too long.
It's been far too long, thanks to the hideous COVID, but it's great to see you. Great to be with you, albeit over the screens.
And you, matey. So I'd like, if we could, to have a fond look back to this time, exactly 1 year ago. Yourself, myself, and all of the Brexit Party MEPs were gearing up for that historic vote on January the 29th in Brussels. How does it feel to have achieved what you set out to achieve? Because, you know, it's not often we get a chance to enjoy victories, is it, Richard?
No, that's right. And, you know, it was amazing, just that sense of achievement, that sense of changing the direction, because as you mentioned in your kind introduction, you know, it was all going under the Conservative government, under Theresa May's government. It was going completely the wrong way. And, you know, essentially in launching the Brexit Party, you know, we stopped the rot and we called an end to her nonsense, her weak leadership, her deception. And, you know, we basically, after the European elections, we secured her removal. We ensured that Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. And, you know, that changed the history of the whole, you know, the course of Brexit. And so, yeah, it was very satisfying. Of course, we didn't get long to enjoy it before, you know, COVID and everything that's come since. But yeah, just to be involved in changing and shifting, you know, the nature of the direction of the UK as a nation is something that's quite rare for anybody. So, you know, to be a part of that obviously is, you know, was fantastic.
Do you think the Brexit Party, though, has achieved the recognition it surely deserves? Because it seems to me that even though Boris got in thanks to what the Brexit Party did, and then we got Brexit over the line, the Brexit Party still seems to be a bit of a, I don't know, dirty word, especially amongst the Conservatives.
That's exactly right. I mean, they are a breed, and no, there's been no thanks, no recognition whatsoever of that. You know, not even by Boris. The fact that without us, he wouldn't have been Prime Minister. I mean, you know, before we launched, he was basically a sort of rather regretful shadow, and he wouldn't even come and speak. He's not a brave man. He wouldn't even come and speak at a Leave Means Leave rally. He was so frightened of his own shadow. It was just ridiculous. But no, there's no question. We changed the course of history. The Tories will never thank us. That's their nature. But I think the nation knows what we did. The nation knows that Theresa May's deal was the worst of all worlds. And I think the nation knows that, it's thanks to the Brexit Party that Brexit did get done. Boris, of course, and his team, they got it over the line. And then there was, in a sense, the 11-month period from when we actually legally left to the end of the transition period. And again, actually, it's because of the hardline negotiating stance that we adopted in autumn of 2019, when we made it clear that we would stand in every seat in the land unless Boris changed course. We secured from him that vital agreement that there would be no extension to the transition period, and they put that in the manifesto, and then they put it in law, and that was thanks to us. And we secured the commitment that they would only seek a free trade agreement, and again, that's thanks to us. So those were the critical things that we negotiated in that difficult period in the general election. And Nigel and I were under most horrendous pressure from all sides. It was intolerable. But that really did ensure. And of course, just imagine if we hadn't had that one year maximum extension to the end of December, the pressure for Boris to extend because of COVID and because the negotiations weren't going very well would have been utterly intolerable. He would have had to extend, and it would have just been never ending. So, it really does show, actually, you never know what's around the corner, and you've got to be prepared to walk away. And in fairness, I've been very critical of the government in their handling of the whole COVID crisis. But credit where credit's due on the Brexit negotiations. Lord David Frost, the chief negotiator, he held firm. Boris held firm, and yes, the compromise we don't like, of course. At the end, I mean, we described it as a giant leap forward for sovereignty and taking back control. Of course, there was a horrible compromise on fishing and on Northern Ireland that has frustrated all of us. But the point is, like any relationship, any business relationship, any contractual relationship, that can always be negotiated subsequently from here. And I think that's inevitably what must now happen. And various people that you've had on your show, and are close to, Ben, Habib, June, and ourselves at Reform UK are committed to continuing to put pressure on to change that. And I think many Conservative MPs actually realise that certain things need to be worked on the free trade deal with the EU. But my goodness me, aren't we seeing? It's incredible. Amongst all the benefits of Brexit, no one ever envisaged that it would literally save lives within the first month of the end of the transition period. And here we are, the UK in the top 3 or 4 nations for rolling out the vaccine programme. And that's purely because we had left the EU, and therefore we weren't pressured or bullied in any way to stay as part of the EU's overall vaccination programme, which has shown itself to be a bureaucratic, bungling mountain of incompetence that is simply leading to people dying in the EU because they're not getting the vaccine, when people are now going to survive in the UK because we're rolling out the vaccine. So that's pretty powerful stuff.
It's interesting, isn't it, how one of the primary blocks of Project Fear was the fact that we would run out of drugs in the UK. There'd be no insulin, and then here we are, Richard. The first big moment has been the UK secured the vaccine ahead of the EU. There's a wonderful graph today where the UK is like this and the European Union is like this. It's like, well, hey, Project Fear didn't happen. So let's just look at some of the things that we were told would happen, some of the calamity that would ensue. No sandwiches. We'd run out of biscuits, cheese sandwiches, and all this nonsense. And yet you've always been incredibly positive about the benefits of Brexit. But it's been a moot point since the deal was announced. Do you think that we really have got Brexit done, Richard, or are key areas such as fishing and particularly the Northern Ireland Protocol and how that may open up a unified Ireland and an IndyRef 2 in Scotland, is this really a proper Brexit, or is it still leaving the cat flap open for dangerous things like that, and also the prospect for future governments to try and rejoin the European Union?
There's always risks in life, Martin, for sure. But we have got Brexit done. We're not subject to the European Court of Justice. We're not subject to Brussels, determining our rules in any shape or form. We are free to make our own decisions. And there are some decisions where, and if we want to deregulate, which I desperately want to do, where it's sensible to do so, to get rid of all the daft regulations, there are some things where we make decisions and we know there may be consequences. But the smart thing to do is if you say, well, I really want to achieve this, and the consequences may be that, well, then why don't you organise to be able to respond and deal with and absorb the consequences so that you can achieve the thing you're really setting out to do? And you take Northern Ireland, for example, and that is a key thing, and we're already hearing, of some of the issues that is unfolding. And with the Brexit Party, all of us, Ben Habib and Nigel and many folk, were really vocal during the general election, highlighting the flaws to Boris's withdrawal agreement. The truth is, he just put lipstick on Theresa May's deal, but with the few important tweaks that I mentioned earlier. And it was quite clear many of the Conservatives didn't understand what Boris had done with Northern Ireland. But I think there are ways through it, and I think that the role of the government now is to identify, what are the blockages, how are the EU making life a bit of a pain in the arse for us, and then we have to deal with it. And frankly, if I was Prime Minister now, I would say within a month, we've seen some hiccups, we need to deal with it. One thought, for example, is we could actually make all of the businesses that trade between each other trusted traders or authorised economic operators, and then actually everything's done, whatever needs to be done can be done electronically, and that's that. So it's what I call the can-do attitude. Look, we've got an issue, we've got to sort it, and get people around a table and sort it. And what I hate is this sort of constant, it means the whole thing's a disaster. That's absolute nonsense. We all know, any of us who've been in real life, you get hiccups, you get teething problems, you get bumps in the road. Well, let's identify the problem and find a solution.
Okay, Richard, so you're called the Reform Party. So specifically, what do you think needs reforming in modern Britain, and what is your policy schedule to address that?
So we clearly said that we supported the Great Barrington Declaration as the right way through the COVID crisis. And there's actually no question now that if that had been adopted rather than poo-pooed, then in a sense, because that was about protecting the vulnerable and the shielding, letting the rescue on the lives, more people, actually more young people, yes, they would have caught COVID in the early autumn, but they would then built up that shield of immunity that actually you have to have in order to deal with a virus. And so actually, the Great Barrington Declaration approach would quite probably, if that had been adopted, that would have flattened the sombrero, to use the government's approach. And it would have meant that actually coming into the real peak of the winter crisis, when the variant hit, and obviously no one knew the variant would hit and that it maybe, would be so transmissible, that actually there may have been a greater sense of a greater amount of immunity, and that might have reduced the pressure that the NHS is currently seeing. So, that was our point on COVID. But now, we've got to get ready for the recovery, and we've got to have the courage to say that the moment you have vaccinated all of the over 70s and the healthcare workers and those who need shielding, that we've got to start opening up. And I've called for the first day of spring. What a great day that is in the annual calendar. That should be Freedom Day. We need a target. We need a ray of hope, a beacon of light to give us some optimism. And so I'm calling for that. I'm really worried you can see the narrative now. I'm a bit worried, the NHS is going to be very busy for the next 6 months catching up with operations that have been delayed. And then I'm a bit worried that the NHS is going to be under winter pressure next year. So, with all the pressure on the NHS, we've got to protect it. And therefore, actually we shouldn't ease the restrictions just in case there's some form of re-emergence. Well, I think it's about time we as a nation said, well, hang on, folks, the whole role of the NHS actually is to look after us, the customer that pays the bills. And, of course, we love and value and applaud and appreciate the frontline doctors and nurses and surgeons doing a wonderful job on the front line. But we need to be able to challenge and criticize, the managers behind the scenes when they make serious mistakes. They kept telling us there was a second wave coming. So why on earth, when I was the guy who broke the story that they'd dismantled the Nightingale hospitals, the biggest one in the Excel Centre, why did they dismantle them if they were worried about a second wave? Why hadn't they contacted and called up and had them ready and trained, the 30,000 retired medics that were there ready and waiting? It's that waste of our money, our cash. It's that unwillingness to tell the truth. Matt Hancock, after I broke the story, he stood up in the House of Commons and lied to MPs and the nation that the Nightingale hospitals they hadn't been decommissioned when I proved they had, and that they were ready and waiting to be used. And if you can't trust someone to stand in the House of Commons and tell the truth, how can we trust so much of the other stuff? So, we've got to change our response to COVID, and then Reform UK is going to be putting forward some bold ideas how we can grow the economy faster, because that's what we have to do. You can't tax your way out of this crisis. We've got to grow our way out of it. And the way to do that, we have to cut taxes in order to create faster growth. We have to cut the unnecessary daft regulations in order, again, to create faster growth. And then we've got to cut the mountain of government waste in order to create faster growth. And with faster growth, the benefits to the good ordinary folk across the whole country is very simple. You get better wages because there's faster growth. And when you've got more money in the system, more money in the economy, guess what? We can afford to invest more in the NHS, more in our healthcare. And if you've got better health, you'll have longer lives. Those are the key things that we're focusing on. And then there's big issues that we've talked about before, like reforming the House of Lords. That's peaked, don't you? When the Prime Minister appoints his own brother, who had previously resigned twice as a minister. I think those were his only two achievements when he ever made the news, actually. When you appoint him to the House of Lords and you appoint one of your biggest personal donors, that actually the nepotism and cronyism means that the House of Lords really is beyond the pale. And likewise, the BBC, the civil service, failings in that. There's, we all love our country. And we all need it to be run better and to be managed better and to be governed better. And that's what we stand for. And that's what we're going to try and do. It's not easy. It's not easy, that's for sure. But you have to try. Good.
Now, you're a successful businessman. Obviously, Richard, you've hired and fired many times over the year. You mentioned Matt Hancock there. If you're in charge, would you fire him?
To be honest, actually, Martin, yes, I would. I would thank him for the work that he's done. But, I would say that, fundamentally, some things have gone badly wrong. It would be between him and Grant Shapps, because the failure to close our borders and the constant waffling nonsense that we've heard when they've been asked that question by journalists, hindsight may show that that was the biggest failure of all, because you look at the real success stories, the islands like New Zealand, like Australia, what they did, they shut their borders, they locked the borders down, and then actually that meant that they could stop the virus coming in. They identified the virus, and then they were able to deal with it. So those would be my top two to say thank you, but it's time for someone else to come in.
Superb. So that's Tweedledee and Tweedledum out the window. I think a lot of people will agree with that. I want to ask you another question that's really struck me, Richard, as completely baffling since the beginning. And why has there been no political opposition to lockdowns? Labour wanted it harder, sooner, longer. The Lib Dems, they've been sent out a missing persons, warrant for them. They haven't even been at the table. Why is there no voice of opposition towards lockdowns? What is it about lockdowns that the establishment loves?
It's a really good question. There has been no opposition until we stood up last November and said that we supported the Great Barrington Declaration. And I think it's just weakness, a lack of courage to really look at the evidence, and a lack of willingness to consider the alternatives. that's the reality. And the way that they dismissed anybody who wanted to probe and to challenge them, the way they dismissed, the incredibly eminent leaders and supporters from the medical world, from the scientific world of the Great Barrington Declaration was nothing short, frankly, of defamatory, just appalling. And I think it's been seriously to the detriment. And the Labour Party haven't done their job. A few brave Conservative backbench MEPs have tried, the likes of Sir Desmond Swayne, Mark Harper and Steve Baker, should be credited for trying, but just with the nature of it at the moment, has just been impossible. And it's been really to the nation's detriment.
Well, I wonder if there's a parallel to be drawn here, Richard, in terms of Brexit and lockdown. It seems to me that the voices that were pro-Britain, pro-leaving, are also pro-opening up the economy. Have we retreated into this state of, total dependence, be it on the European Union or on the state? And for the life of us, we are not even allowed to criticise the NHS, are we?
It's really worrying, actually, because we're sort of reliant on the civil service. They've had an absolute shocker. From the moment that, a year ago, amazingly, if you said which nations around the world were best prepared for a pandemic, many nations would have said, oh, the United Kingdom's really well organised. It's got a great plan. Well, it turned out we had a plan for flu, but not for a coronavirus. Most people would say, it doesn't matter what it's for, folks, have a plan and be ready for it. That was the first civil service failing. And then there've been numerous thereafter. And, MPs constantly used to say, oh, our civil service is the envy of the world. Far from it. They're the laughing stock of the world. We've had one of the worst responses to the virus. And that's been because it's just been an absolute blob where you pour an instruction in and you pour a load of money in at one end and it just disappears into the blob and nothing happens. It's interesting, isn't it? A slight generalization, but Brexiteers generally were entrepreneurial, they were ambitious, and to a degree, risk takers. We believed in ourselves, we believed in our nation, whereas, the corporatists, the managers who've climbed the greasy corporate pole, the civil servants who are looking to, become the ultimate Sir Humphrey, they all wanted to stay with Remain and with the EU. They didn't need to make any big decisions. They could always blame someone else in the big establishment, sort of blob. And this is a bit the same, actually, with this virus. At the one hand, you had people like in Sweden, where you had, the very courageous view they took. And the truth is, I checked just recently, they've still got about 25% less deaths per 100,000 people than we've got. And most people don't realize America has got less deaths per 100,000 people than the United Kingdom. Forget what you read in the press and people thinking it's a shambles in the States. It may have been, but it's been even more of a shambles here. And yet we've basically got a one-party dictatorship where our liberties have been taken away. Our freedom of speech is massively under threat. You've seen it from other media channels being taken down on YouTube. And now, Martin, in supposedly the greatest democracy, or one of the greatest democracies in the world, they're talking about removing the ballot box from the many elections across the whole of the UK that is due to be held in May.
Yeah. I mean, that's already happened. We've already seen one round of elections be cancelled last May. Of course, people like Sadiq Khan weren't challenged. That may happen again. I want to come on to the May elections soon, but before we move on to that, you mentioned a really important point, I think there, Richard, about this kind of one-dimensional take of the press, because I'm sensing that anybody who puts their head above the parapet, as with Brexit, now with COVID, are annihilated by the establishment. And aligned with that, we're seeing things like YouGov putting out polls which seem to back up government messaging in a way that I don't recognise by talking to ordinary people. And there seems to be this addiction to lockdown. And Richard, is the vaccine even going to be a way out of this? Or do you think that we might now have to live with lockdowns?
I'm really, really worried about it, actually, because actually when I have actually read the government's vaccine delivery plan, a sort of 48-page document, but it's it is. But there's a really important paragraph in there, which is where the government admits what they haven't actually, openly, transparently told the people, which is they don't know the effect it will have on the transmission of the disease. They don't know how long the vaccine will last. But they do know, and the great news is, let's try and be positive. The great news is it does reduce the severity of the symptoms. But what I'm worried about is that they'll say, well, because we don't know whether or not it's going to reduce transmission, and we don't know how long it's going to last, we're going to have to protect the NHS again, rather than organise the extra capacity that the Nightingale hospitals could do, and therefore we can't give you your freedoms back. And I think it's really, really worrying. And there's some other important things here. So the amount of flu and pneumonia and bronchitis, amongst and generally amongst the elderly population who end up going into hospital with those respiratory illnesses, they've literally almost disappeared this winter. And is that because they're being correctly or wrongly allocated as a COVID case and therefore not allocated as those? Or, for example, has the significant amount of hand washing we're doing, which is probably one of the benefits, has that reduced the transmission of flu, for example? It may be. Let's hope to God people don't conclude that it's wearing a mask, which I think is, well, who knows? Time will tell. But these are you can see where people are going to go with this. The people who like to be authoritarian, and I think it's really important that those of us that believe in liberties, freedom, personal responsibility, individual choice, that actually we're going to have to. I think we've got the battle of our lives. It could even be greater, Martin, than the battle of Brexit. And I've been saying for a number of months now that actually the great divide on COVID is actually worse than the battle of Brexit. And who knows? But this year will be very, very telling. And I really do think we've got some big challenges ahead, and it's pretty brutal for those of us who are prepared to put a head above the parapet and get shot at.
Yeah, I completely agree, Richard, in terms of the toxic nature of the media, and let's not even get into social media, which has become, I think, absolutely crazed. I mean, people are going to war with each other on a daily basis. I think COVID is making Brexit look like a tea party. And I'm saying that as someone like yourself, who was on the front line taking the bullets. But moving forward then, if you're going to be stepping into that arena with reform to stand, it may not happen in May. I mean, the betting money seems to be it might be put back to further in the summer. But I want to know from your perspective of specifically standing in elections, is it your plan to field candidates in council elections and also the police and crime commissioners elections? Because they are key, aren't they, Richard?
Absolutely. We made it very clear that we want to stand in as many seats as we can with some great candidates in all the various different elections, the local council elections, the police and crime commissioners, the Welsh elections, the Scottish elections, some metro mayors, the London elections, all of those. And we've got some great people coming forward. We had a lot actually that were sort of holding back until the name change was approved by the Electoral Commission, our dear friends, and we're very grateful to them. And now that, and literally in the last few days, I've had a couple of amazing candidates saying, actually, I know what you stand for. You stand for what they believe in, and it's having that courage to say, we can do so much better. If we revert to actually, your strapline, common sense. Maybe the UK, if we ran ourselves, I use the example when we launched our Scottish party with our new Scottish leader, Michelle Ballantyne, last week. And, we're delighted by that. And I said, think of a pint glass. And my goodness, we all like a pint glass, preferably filled with something either beer or Guinness, don't we, Martin? But think of a pint of common sense with a little sort of dash on the top of gut instinct. There's so much actually of how the nation is managed and run that, goodness me, if our civil servants and our council officers applied a lot more common sense, then they wouldn't waste as much money, and they'd make some judgments and decisions quicker, and would all be a lot better off.
Okay, so what about yourself, Richard? Do you intend to stand, and if so, in what capacity and where?
I will definitely stand. I'm still just working out, but it's likely to be it's likely to be in London. A number of people have been urging me to stand, against Sadiq because, we've got to get London. London's in dire trouble. It's in the worst trouble that in any of our lifetimes, Martin. So, that's something that's there, but, it's difficult. Sadiq is the great selfie man. He is the incumbent. Or then there's the London Assembly elections. So, that's the area that I'm particularly looking at. But obviously, as chairman of a party that's trying to stand across the whole country, there's a lot to be done. But we will have, mark my words, we will have candidates in all of those elections, and we will have literally, I think, thousands of candidates, and people will know that Reform UK is serious, and we're doing what's important in a democracy, Martin, which is to provide a choice. That's the whole point. And look, it's tough being a small party in a system where, certainly in first past the post, it's really tough. We've seen that. But where you've got proportional representation, it's a much fairer system that actually values and respects small parties and enables them to come and for that voice to be heard. And I think that's so important. You take Holyrood, for example. Our new leader, Michelle, she's the only one up there, the only one in the whole of Holyrood who is prepared to stand up and say, the suffering and the misery from lockdown, has to be understood, and there has to be a better way, a better balance, but it requires courage.
Okay, so the big question out there, certainly amongst the former Brexit Party activists who contact me on a daily basis, is the role of Nigel, the party leader. Can we expect Nigel to be taking a prominent position in campaigning, and will Nigel stand anywhere?
Great question, and Nigel was so delighted to have got the transition period done, and subject to the imperfections, to have got the free trade agreement and the role that he played in holding the government to account on that. So I think he'll work out what he wants to do. There's all sorts of media opportunities, and he'll work that out. But what I can tell you is he's on great form, and he's never worried to avoid difficult issues. He's absolutely passionate about these issues of reform. He always has been about these key issues I've mentioned earlier: the House of Lords, the civil service, the BBC, immigration. He is the guy that has had the courage way ahead of many others to stand up. So he's not disappearing anywhere soon. That is for sure.
Am I sensing then, reading between the lines there, that Nigel is going to be the media spokesperson, the front guy in the press, but on the ground, it would seem, is it time for Richard Tice to become that kind of leading from the front, carrying the standard? You've got your sword pulled out. You're the one on the campaign trail. You're that force now.
I think it's a team effort, and actually, it's much bigger than just the two of us. It's important that, as we've just identified, we've got a leader in Scotland, which that's never been the case before with the Brexit Party and before that. Likewise, to have a leader in Wales, and it's, if we're really going to make a difference, and for people to think that we're across the whole country, we need leaders in all these different elections, all these different areas, rolling the sleeves up, getting stuck in, and getting the message across. And we are, of course, going to be in elections where social media is going to play a much bigger role, and we're good at that. We know how to do that. With videos, content stuff, all the stuff that as a broadcaster. So yeah, look, I think it's a team effort. We've all got our strengths. For sure, it's not easy. And look, we'll win some, we'll lose some, and we'll make mistakes, of course. And it's a pretty tough game. But as I come back to, you have to have the courage and the confidence to give it a go and to give the nation that choice.
How do you think COVID will affect campaigning? Because one of the huge impacts the Brexit Party made in those 6 glorious weeks in 2019 were those nationwide rallies. You were often at the front of stage yourself. You're an excellent compere. I did a few when you weren't available. When you were campaigning, and that feeling of coming together, those mass movements, they're going to be hard, aren't they? It's going to be very hard to get into venues to do that kind of thing. And do you think that will favour the incumbent parties?
That will be, you're absolutely right. I think that'd be almost impossible, to be honest, Martin. Like even just literally canvassing on the doorstep. I think, we've as a nation, we've lost the confidence in the ability to socialise. Certainly, if the elections are in May, I think canvassing will basically be, won't really be happening. So yeah, it'd be more of an air war, social media, videos, but we're good at that, and we're certainly as good as anybody else. But of course, you can't rest on your laurels. You can't be complacent. We'll have to do all of that for sure, and more. It's it's not easy, but I think we've got we've done it before. We've got the enthusiasm, the energy. We've got donors coming to us. We've got great people coming to us. So let's watch this space.
You've always had a soft spot in your heart, Richard, for the Electoral Commission. They, of course, took an eternity to actually approve the name change of the Brexit Party to the Reform Party. I thought at one point you were going to get lawyers involved. I mean, what the hell are they playing at? What needs to be done about them? I mean, I was with you at a Brexit Party meeting when we found out that they raided the Brexit Party officers because Gordon Brown weaponised them and sent in the boot boys. They're a problem, aren't they? The Electoral Commission. What needs to be done with them?
I think there's no question that throughout the whole Brexit process, they have demonstrated what became an increasing bias against the Brexit side. And it wasn't just the Brexit Party. Anybody involved in Vote Leave had a torrid time, Darren Grimes in particular. So, we knew their true colours. And they did behave appallingly in the launch of the Brexit Party, aided and abetted, as you say, by Gordon Brown, by the likes of the BBC. And it did feel like a conspiracy, and it was very unpleasant. But, having said that, they have finally given us our name change. We are, of course, we're grateful for that. That's prevented any further uncertainty. But as an organisation, I can tell you, they're just not responsive in the way that you would expect. And I don't think they're that impartial. And they're not actually, they've never really been that helpful. So I think it does need reform. It needs to get, radical reform from the top. There's a new chairman who's either just been announced or about to be announced, but it's much bigger than one person. It does need, a radical makeover, as to so many of these institutions that form the establishment, that basically are the way the country is run and managed. And what you get is this merry-go-round of cosy, comfortable jobs between all these various institutions. And what we don't get enough of is change. And all these bodies, they're all paid for by your viewers, the likes of you and I, and the men and women across the UK. And I just don't think that they represent good value for money. And that's one of the key things that, I touched on earlier about this mountain of wasteful government spending, which is just intolerable.
Another thing that I know you talked about a lot, and I was with you in Peterborough when Mike Green, the best MP Peterborough never had, was pipped to the post. And there was a huge conversation around the postal vote. And it's something that's kind of haunted British politics for a long time. And I know it's something that you care passionately about. In terms of postal voting, Richard, do you think British elections are rigged?
Look, we know something bad went on in Peterborough. It was really hard to be able to prove it to the sufficient level, the sufficient burden of proof. And because when we spotted some things had gone wrong and we then tried to verify, all of a sudden a huge amount of intimidation had occurred on the streets of Peterborough. So it was difficult to actually find that required level of burden of proof. But we know some bad stuff's gone on. Nigel has seen it for decades in the past, and it shouldn't be that difficult. It should be perfectly achievable to be able to properly verify someone's identity and know that they've got the right to vote. You know, I think actually I'd quite like it to be compulsory to vote. You know, as a mark of respect to those who fought and died, so that we can enjoy, you know, democracy at the ballot box. But postal voting, if you're going to have it at all, then you've got to make sure that it is absolutely legitimate. You know, there were concerns about the postal vote in the recent US presidential election. We've seen concerns, and you know, some bad stuff goes on, and there are instances in East London, for example, where, you know, people have, you know, they have been quite properly prosecuted and found guilty of electoral fraud, and you can never be complacent, and so what you have to do is you have to make the systems, you know, tougher, more robust, so that any opportunities for that rigging is just eradicated, because it's appalling. It literally makes me sick to the core.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that was one of the hardest moments in the entire history of the Brexit Party for me, because all of us campaigned so hard.
So hard, yeah.
I mean, like I know you and I, our feet, we had like collapsed arches. We were walking every step for Mike Green, and I really wanted to get Mike Green in. And it shows us, doesn't it, the difficulties, Richard, that you'll be facing again, because the first past the post system is so punishing. With that in mind, how realistic do you think it is that the Reform Party will have a stab at getting a Burma on a green bench?
Well, as I say, you have to try. If you don't try, you've got no chance. And sometimes it's not just actually, you know, the bum on the green bench, but it's about shaping, influencing. And the truth is that the Brexit Party, sadly, we didn't win any MPs last year in 2019, but we did shape and influence the course of British history. And, you know, that's absolutely vital. So, you know, let's see. But, you know, with proportional representation, we can, there's no question that we can secure representation this year across the UK. And I think there's an appetite for change. There's an appetite for more choice. And let's wait and see. But obviously, one of the things that we stand for is to reform the voting system. It was back in 2011 that there was a referendum on changing the voting system. And of course, that decided to stick with first past the post. But if you believe in, you know, having referendums every, whatever you want to say, 15, 20 years on an issue, then at some point in the next decade, that issue really needs to be looked at again. And you know, I think people may have a different view on it. It's certainly one of the things that we'll be campaigning for, because I think it is right that you have a broader spectrum. And it's interesting, the people who propose first past the post say that it leads to strong government. Well, this year, what we're really seeing is sort of dictatorial government. And actually, first past the post between 2010 and 2019 was a constant series of coalitions and chaos. So actually, it doesn't necessarily lead to first past the post, to strong government under the first past the post system. And I just think there's a better way that is that actually we're already using in parts of the UK at the moment.
Okay, Richard, just a couple of questions to wind up. So we started Unlocked because I was a commentator, as you know, before I got involved in the Brexit Party, in the media, on Sky News for many years. But when I got involved in supporting Brexit, I was always the only Brexiteer on a panel. I was always getting shouted at from 4 different directions, always responding to abuse and criticism. You know how hard it's been doing that. That's unlikely to change. In fact, I think it's probably going to get worse, because not only did most of the mainstream media get their arses kicked at the referendum, and they don't like that, but now people like you and I are supporting the ending of lockdown. So as we touched upon earlier, that kind of entrenched opposition is getting even harder. That's why we started Unlocked, just to try and give ourselves our own platform. With that in mind, when you start campaigning to try and get seats in elections, do you think you'll get a fair crack of the whip from the mainstream media, or do you think you'll even get a fair showing at all? Will they try and ignore you altogether, Richard?
They probably will, but I think that now that Brexit is finished and we've got a different name and we're looking forward, I think we've got, I think we'll get a a better chance of some form of hearing. But of course, it's not easy. That's why it's so important that we have, as many candidates across all the different types of elections. If we achieve that actually under the electoral rules themselves, the media, they have no choice but to give us a certain hearing. So that's really important. That's why we've got to get, so many candidates all over the place. But then actually, with the likes of your good selves and, some of the others who are running internet-based broadcasting operations, actually that does enable us to spread the word more. And that's a really good thing, because guess what it is? It's competition. Yeah. You're not afraid of competition. You'll have good days and bad days like me. But that makes us better and better. But it means, I think there's more outlets for that. And it's really interesting in, whether it's through YouTube or Facebook and all the various tablets and devices, how people get their news. My kids are between 18 and 23. They didn't buy a newspaper. They didn't sit and watch the news at 10 or Channel 4 at 7, whenever it is. They get it on their tablets, their devices. And that presents opportunities for people like Unlocked and many others, competitors of yours out there. And what we've got to do is have an interesting message, a relevant message that people want to hear and talk about in the pubs and the clubs and on the street and in the shops. And then actually that's how we can get people thinking, that's real. Actually, these people, they've got a proper plan to get better wages, more cash in their pocket. And that's what I think people will warm to.
Okay, Richard, final question. I think I know the answer, and that is you might be a little bit mad. But look, you've changed the history of politics. You set out what you set out to achieve. You've done that. You got Brexit done. You got it over the line. Without the likes of yourself and Nigel and the small part people like myself play, we wouldn't have got this done. You're hugely successful in the real world. You don't really need the money. You don't really need the hassle. Why the hell are you getting involved once again in frontline politics?
Simple, actually, Martin. To try and shape an influence and make a difference. And for decades, I always said to myself that I would spend the first chunk of my adult life working, earning some money, and then to try and give something back and to make a difference. And that's where I'm at. And yeah, for sure, for all the reasons you've just mentioned, it looks completely mad. There are many times when I think, this is so hard. But look, big change, big, making a real big shift in how things are run at the national level, it's not easy. And in a sense, it shouldn't be easy, actually. It should be difficult because it's so important to so many people's lives. But you only make progress by disruptors, by people coming in with a big idea, whether it was Thomas Edison with the light bulb, or whether it was, Steve Jobs with the Mac computer and the iPhone, or Bill Gates, these are massive disruptors. And if we can be a disruptor and help improve things and harry and transform things here in the UK, then absolutely it's worth doing, despite all of the grief and the pain. And you've touched on it during this interview. It should be difficult to change things, but it shouldn't be so unpleasant and so, in a sense, abusive, the way that it's going with social media and such like. And I really do think that that's something that somehow we need to improve upon. But, look, it's, I just think that we can make a difference. We've got a track record of success. And of course, I think, when you succeed at something, it's actually you sort of, you want to keep succeeding. And of course, we all fail at things. We all get things wrong. I think the great thing is to recognize when you've messed up, screwed up, admit it, learn from it, try not to do it again, but keep trying on at getting them better and better. And occasionally that involves, being slightly mad from time to time.
Yeah, because that's a very long-winded and eloquent and passionate way of admitting you are slightly bonkers. I think you've got to be. I do think you've got to be to do this game, Richard, because you don't do it for the love. As you said, there's a hell of a lot of aggro, but it needs to be done. And I think without voices like yours, without voices of true opposition. We've got a bunch of parties who agree with everything, and we don't have any form of opposition. And likewise, the mainstream media has tried to kind of back the establishment line all the time. It's amazing now, isn't it? How there's this huge morass of establishment thinking almost everywhere. And then a few outliers like yourself. Richard Tice, thank you so much for coming on Unlocked today. It's always a pleasure and never a chore. You know, and I take pride in saying I bought you your first drink after we voted to leave the European Union. I bought 16 beers and 2 bottles of white wine at the bar in Brussels, and we drank.
Delicious they were.
Did we not? And it was a wonderful time. Thanks for coming on the show, and we promise anything you do out there in Wales, in Scotland, in England, out there in the coastal communities, we want to support your activity and make sure that the message gets through. So thank you for appearing today on Unlocked. Richard Tice.
Thank you, Martin.
Cheers, mate.